My wife dragged me to the corporate gala to impress her boss. Stay quiet. Stay in the back. Don't embarrass me, she whispered. When the billionaire owner arrived, he walked past her, stopped in front of me, and said, "I've been looking for you for 20 years. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know." Now, let's dive into today's story. Walter Rourke understood silence the way most people understood breathing. It came naturally to him, an instinct honed over years of watching, listening, and waiting. In his modest ranch house on the outskirts of Plano, Texas, where the suburbs bled into farmland and the sky stretched wide and endless, silence was his refuge. It was also his weapon, though his wife Lena had never realized it. The house itself was unremarkable, a single-story structure with beige siding and a yard that Walter kept neat but not obsessive. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a kitchen with dated appliances that still worked perfectly fine. The mortgage was manageable. The neighbors were quiet. It was the kind of place where a person could think, could plan, could see things clearly without distraction. Lena hated it. "We should be in Preston Hollow by now," she'd say, standing in their modest living room with its worn leather couch and simple coffee table. "People in my position don't live like this." Walter would nod, returning to whatever he was reading, usually something dense and practical, operations research or systems theory. He didn't argue. Arguments required emotional investment, and Walter had learned long ago to conserve his energy for things that mattered. It was late September when the pattern became unbearable, even for Walter's patience. The air conditioning hummed steadily, fighting against the Texas heat that refused to yield even as autumn approached. Lena stormed through the front door at 7:30 in the evening, her work bag hitting the entryway table with a crack that made the picture frames rattle. "We need to talk about money," she announced, not bothering with a greeting. Walter looked up from his laptop at the dining room table, where he'd been finishing a report for a manufacturing client in Austin. His workspace was organized, notebook, pens arranged by color, a single coffee mug that had gone cold hours ago. He'd been expecting this conversation. It came monthly now, like clockwork, always at the end of the billing cycle when credit card statements arrived. "All right," he said evenly. Lena pulled out the chair across from him, but didn't sit. She remained standing, holding a stack of envelopes and papers like evidence at a trial. Her navy pantsuit was crisp despite the long day, her dark hair pulled back in a style that screamed corporate professionalism. At 42, she was attractive in a severe way. Sharp cheekbones, calculating eyes, a mouth that curved naturally toward disapproval. "Do you know what our credit card balance is?" she demanded. "I know what mine is," Walter replied. $347. "I'll pay it off Friday." "Our shared cards, Walter. The household expenses. You manage those." Her jaw tightened. "Because someone has to be the adult in this marriage." Walter closed his laptop slowly, giving her his full attention. This was one of Lena's favorite tactics, implying that his calm demeanor was actually childishness, that his lack of drama meant a lack of responsibility. He'd stopped correcting her years ago. "I pay my half of the mortgage," he said. "I pay my half of utilities. I buy groceries every other week. My truck is paid off. My phone is on my own plan. What exactly am I not covering?" Lena threw the papers onto the table. They scattered across the surface, a mess of charges from restaurants Walter had never been to, stores he'd never shopped at, weekend trips he'd never taken. "You're too comfortable being average," she said, her voice rising. "I carry this family. You just coast along, doing whatever you feel like, no real ambition, no drive. Do you know what people say when I tell them my husband is a freelance consultant? They smile and change the subject because they're embarrassed for me." Walter glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. He could see her name on every statement. Her charges. Her choices. "I solve problems for companies," he said. "They pay me because I deliver results. Last quarter, I made $83,000. This quarter, I'm on track for 95. From temporary gigs." She practically spat the words. "You don't even have a boss, Walter. You're not building anything. You're just existing." He studied her face, noting the flush of anger across her cheeks, the way her fingers drummed against the table. This wasn't really about money. It never was. This was about status, about how things looked to her colleagues and friends, about the constant competition she turned their marriage into. "I have a career," she continued when he didn't respond. "A real one. Senior logistics manager at Redline Distribution. People respect that. People know what that means." Walter leaned back in his chair. "They pay you well." "Damn right they do. $140,000 a year, plus bonuses." "Because I have titles, Walter. I have a position. I'm building something that matters." He nodded slowly. "That's good." The simplicity of his response seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. Her face reddened further as she grabbed her work bag from where she'd dropped it. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You think being calm makes you smart. It doesn't. It just makes you forgettable." She left the kitchen, her footsteps heavy down the hallway. A moment later, the bedroom door slammed. Walter sat in the silence she'd left behind. The air conditioning continued its steady hum. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the county road. He could smell the coffee that had gone cold in his mug. Dark roast, no sugar, the same way he'd taken it for 20 years. He picked up the credit card statements and began reading them methodically. Restaurants in Dallas, upscale places where lunch for one cost $70. Online shopping for boutiques. A weekend stay at a spa resort in the hill country that he'd never been invited to. Each item told a story, and Walter read them all with the same careful attention he gave everything else in his life. Then he filed them neatly in the household folder, closed his laptop, and carried his cold coffee to the kitchen sink. Tomorrow he had a call with a logistics company in Houston. They were having problems with their distribution network, shipments arriving late, inventory mismatches, warehouse inefficiencies. They'd found him through a referral and were willing to pay his rate without negotiation. Walter smiled faintly as he rinsed the mug. People always paid his rate. They just had to understand what they were buying first. The invitation to Redline Distribution's regional leadership dinner arrived 3 weeks later. It came on heavy cardstock with embossed lettering, formal and corporate. Lena left it on the kitchen counter where Walter would see it. "You're coming with me," she said that evening, not asking. Walter was making dinner, chicken breast, roasted vegetables, nothing fancy but properly prepared. He glanced at the invitation while stirring green beans in the pan. "When is it?" "Friday night. 7 o'clock at the Lakeside Resort near Lake Ray Hubbard. It's important." He noted the edge in her voice. "Important how?" "Regional executives will be there. People I need to network with. And Dale Whitaker, he owns the company. It's a chance to be seen by the right people." Walter plated the chicken, added vegetables, set everything on the table with practiced efficiency. "All right." Lena sat down, already scanning her phone for emails. "You'll need to wear your good suit. The dark gray one, not the blue. And for God's sake, don't embarrass me." "I don't plan to." "I mean it, Walter." She looked up from her phone, her expression serious. "Don't talk business. Don't try to impress anyone with your consulting stories. These people are in real positions. They don't need some freelancer explaining how they could do their jobs better." He cut into his chicken. "I'll be respectful. And don't act smarter than you are. I know you think you understand logistics, because you've done some operations work, but Redline is complicated. We handle millions in inventory. It's not the same as whatever small-time problems you solve." Walter chewed slowly, tasting the herbs he'd used to season the meat. "Thyme and rosemary, simple but effective." "I understand." She seemed satisfied with that and returned to her phone. They ate in silence, which had become their default state. Conversation required common ground, and they'd been standing on different territories for years now. Friday arrived with the kind of heat that made asphalt shimmer and car interiors dangerous. Walter spent the day on calls and emails, finalizing a proposal for a manufacturing client who wanted to restructure their supply chain. It was intricate work, the kind that required seeing patterns others missed, understanding how small inefficiencies compounded into major losses. At 6 o'clock, he showered and dressed in the dark gray suit Lena had specified. It fit him well. Walter was 51, but kept himself in decent shape through simple discipline. Morning walks, basic exercises, no excess. The same approach he took with everything. Lena emerged from their bedroom, wearing a burgundy dress that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. She'd had her hair done that afternoon, styled in waves that made her look younger and softer than her usual severe appearance. "You look nice," Walter said honestly. She barely glanced at him. "We can't be late." The drive to the lakeside resort took 40 minutes in Friday evening traffic. Lena spent most of it on her phone, firing off last-minute emails and confirming attendance with colleagues. Walter drove in silence, watching the sprawl of suburban Dallas give way to the more rural areas around the lake. The sun was low, painting everything in amber light. The resort itself was upscale but not ostentatious. A modern building with large windows overlooking the water, a circular driveway where valets waited to take cars. Walter parked in the lot instead. "The walk would be good." "Why are we parking out here?" Lena demanded. "It's not far." She sighed, but didn't argue further, clearly saving her energy for the event itself. They walked together, but not close, their shadows stretching behind them in the late sun. Inside, the resort had been set up for the dinner in a large banquet room with views of the lake. Round tables were arranged across polished wood floors, each set with white linens and corporate neutral centerpieces. A bar occupied one corner, already busy with executives loosening their ties and ordering drinks. The sound of conversation filled the space. Careful laughter, strategic small talk, the particular energy of people who were always performing. Lena immediately began working the room, greeting colleagues and superiors with practiced warmth. Walter followed at a distance, holding a glass of water he'd gotten from the bar. He didn't drink at these events. Clear thinking was valuable, and alcohol clouded observation. "That's him," Lena said quietly, nodding toward a man near the center of the room. "Dale Whitaker." Walter studied the owner of Redline Distribution. Late 60s, silver hair combed back from a lined face, expensive watch that he wore unconsciously. He was talking with a group of younger executives, but his posture suggested distraction. His eyes kept moving, scanning the room, never settling. "He looked stressed," Walter observed. "He's always stressed. The company's been struggling with efficiency issues. Deliveries are running late, costs are up. Everyone knows it, but no one can seem to fix it." Walter filed that information away and continued observing. The room was full of people who talked confidently about problems they didn't understand. He could hear fragments of conversation, complaints about vendors, arguments about staffing levels, debates over technology investments. All surface-level thinking, addressing symptoms rather than causes. They were seated at a table with 6 other people, all from Lena's department or adjacent divisions. The conversation during dinner was predictable. Safe topics, company gossip, careful positioning. Walter ate his salmon and vegetables, contributed nothing, and listened to everything. It was during dessert that Dale Whitaker approached their table. "Evening, folks," he said, pulling up a chair that someone quickly vacated for him. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" The table responded with enthusiastic agreement. Lena straightened, her professional smile bright and immediate. "Mr. Whitaker, I don't think you've met my husband Walter." "Walter, this is Dale Whitaker, our CEO." Walter extended his hand. Dale's grip was firm but quick, a man who'd shaken thousands of hands and found none of them interesting. "What do you do, Walter?" Dale asked, more politeness than curiosity. "I'm a freelance operations consultant." "Ah." The single syllable carried dismissal. Dale had already turned his attention back to the table at large. "I've got to tell you all, I'm at my wit's end with our current situation. We're hemorrhaging money and time on routing and inventory management. Every consultant we bring in tells us to hire more people or buy new software, but none of it addresses the real problem." Several people at the table nodded sympathetically. One man, Jim something, from warehouse management, launched into a prepared speech about the challenges of modern logistics. Walter continued eating his dessert, a chocolate mousse that was too sweet but competently made. "The real issue," Dale continued, cutting off Jim's monologue, "is that no one can identify where the actual breakdown is happening. We're hitting targets on paper, but in reality, we're missing delivery windows and paying overtime like it's going out of style. Something in the system is fundamentally broken." It might be the cross-dock sequencing, Walter said quietly. The table went silent. Dale turned to him slowly. What? Walter set down his spoon. Your cross-dock operations. The sequencing is likely misaligned with your delivery windows. It's not a staffing problem or a technology problem. It's a timing and prioritization problem. How would you know that? The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely surprised. From listening, Walter said, in the past hour, I've heard 3 different people mention late trucks at the cross-dock, delayed sortation, and overtime in the loading bays. Those aren't separate issues. They're symptoms of the same problem. Your freight is probably arriving in the right sequence for the warehouse, but wrong for actual delivery routes. So everything gets resorted, which eats time, which pushes teams into overtime, which increases costs. Dale leaned forward. Keep going. Walter could feel Lena's tension beside him, a physical thing. He ignored it. The problem compounds because once you're behind, you stay behind. Your teams start anticipating delays, which means they pad their timelines, which means the actual problem gets obscured by behavioral adaptations. You're probably looking at reports that show acceptable performance because people have learned to work around the inefficiency rather than fix it. Jesus, Dale muttered. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I've been sitting in meetings for 6 months listening to consultants tell me we need workforce optimization and integrated software platforms. You're saying it's simpler than that. Usually is, Walter replied. Complex problems often have simple roots. The complexity is just grown over time as people work around the original issue instead of addressing it. Dale studied him with new interest. What did you say you do? I fix systems. Companies hire me to find inefficiencies they can't see themselves because they're too close to the operation. And you just figured out our cross-dock problem from dinner conversation? I noticed a pattern. I need to see your actual operation to confirm anything. Dale nodded slowly, still typing on his phone. What's your rate? Lena shifted in her seat, but Walter answered before she could interrupt. Depends on the scope. For diagnostic work, $2,000 a day plus expenses. For implementation, we negotiate based on complexity and timeline. That's reasonable. Dale stood, pocketing his phone. I'm going to have someone reach out to you next week. If you're half as good as you sound, we should talk seriously. He thanked the table for their time and moved on to another group. The moment he left, conversation erupted. Did that really just happen? Jim asked. Lena's smile was frozen in place. Walter has a knack for observations, she said tightly. Under the table, her hand found Walter's knee and squeezed hard enough to hurt. A warning. A reminder that she was the one with the career here, the position, the authority. Walter didn't react. He simply finished his mousse and waited for the evening to end. The drive home was silent for the first 20 minutes. Lena stared out the passenger window, her jaw working like she was chewing through words she couldn't quite speak. Finally, she said, "That was inappropriate." What was? You know what? Diagnosing company problems in front of executives like you're some kind of expert. These are people I work with, Walter. People who determine my career trajectory. Dale asked a question. I answered it. You made me look small. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I'm the one who works there. I'm the senior logistics manager. You're just a consultant they're probably going to call out of pity. Walter kept his eyes on the road. He didn't sound pitiful. God, you don't even see it, do you? You don't understand how these things work. You come into my professional space and show off, and now people are going to wonder why I didn't identify these problems myself. You made me look incompetent. I made an observation about operational efficiency. That has nothing to do with your competence. Everything has to do with perception, Walter. Everything. But you wouldn't understand that because you don't have to navigate corporate politics. You just show up, do your little projects, and leave. You don't build anything permanent. You don't create real value. He pulled into their driveway, put the truck in park. In the dim interior light, Lena's face looked older, harder. I create value, Walter said quietly. People pay me because I solve problems they can't solve themselves. That's as real as it gets. She laughed bitterly. You think you're so smart. You think you see things other people miss. But you know what I see? A man who's too afraid to commit to anything real. A man who hides behind temporary work, so he never has to prove himself long-term. Walter got out of the truck without responding. By the time he'd reached the front door, Lena had already brushed past him, disappearing into the house with sharp, angry movements. He stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up at the stars. Out here, away from the city center, you could actually see them, countless points of light that had traveled unimaginable distances just to be observed. Walter had always liked that about space. The permanence of it, the patient, inevitable nature of celestial mechanics. Things moved in predictable patterns if you understood the forces at play. Inside, he could hear Lena slamming drawers in the bedroom. He went to his office instead, a converted spare bedroom where he kept his files and equipment. The space was neat, organized, everything in its place. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulling up the notes he'd been keeping about redline distribution. Because Walter hadn't just noticed the crosstalk problem tonight. He'd been noticing problems with redline for 3 years. Every time Lena came home complaining about work, every time she mentioned a deadline missed or a cost overrun or a conflict with another department. He'd been listening, filing information away, building a mental map of a company that was bleeding efficiency. He'd never mentioned it because Lena never asked. She'd made it clear that his opinions on her workplace were unwelcome, that his lack of formal position within a corporate structure meant his insights were irrelevant. So Walter had stayed quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment to demonstrate exactly what he saw. That moment, it seemed, had just arrived. The call came on Monday morning. Walter was reviewing quarterly reports from his current clients when his phone buzzed with an unknown Texas number. "This is Walter. Mr. Rourke, this is Dale Whitaker. We spoke briefly at the dinner Friday night. I remember. Good. Listen, I don't usually do this, but I'd like to meet with you. Privately, off-site. Would you be available for lunch today?" Walter glanced at his calendar. He had a call scheduled for 2 o'clock, but mornings were clear. "I can do that." "Excellent. There's a diner called Rosie's on Route 78, about halfway between Plano and our facility. Do you know it? I'll find it. 12:30. Just you and me. No assistants, no lawyers, no formality. I want to have a real conversation." They ended the call, and Walter sat back, considering. Dale Whitaker wasn't the kind of man who arranged private lunches with people who'd spoken up once at a company dinner. This was deliberate, calculated. The CEO had seen something worth pursuing. Walter spent the morning finishing his existing work, then drove out to Rosie's Diner. It was exactly the kind of place he'd expected. Worn booths with cracked vinyl, a counter where 3 old-timers sat nursing coffee, walls decorated with vintage license plates and faded photographs of the area from decades past. The smell of grease and coffee hung in the air, comfortable and unpretentious. Dale was already in a back booth when Walter arrived, wearing jeans and a polo shirt instead of his suit from Friday. The informality was another signal. This wasn't a business negotiation. This was an evaluation. "Thanks for coming," Dale said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I already ordered coffee. You want anything?" "Coffee's fine." A waitress brought 2 mugs and a pot, filled them both, and disappeared without unnecessary conversation. Dale took a sip, then set the mug down with the careful placement of a man choosing his words. "I did some research on you over the weekend," he said. "Called a few people you've worked with. They all said the same thing. You're quiet, you're expensive, and you write more often than anyone they've ever hired." "I try to be." "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" 23 years. Started in manufacturing, moved into logistics and operations about 15 years ago. "And you prefer freelance over permanent positions?" Walter considered the question. "I prefer solving problems over managing politics. Permanent positions require both. Freelance lets me focus on what I'm good at." Dale nodded slowly. "That's honest. Most people would dress it up prettier. Most people are trying to impress you. And you're not. You called me. You already know what I can do, or you wouldn't be here." A faint smile crossed Dale's face. "Fair point." He pulled out a tablet from the bag beside him, opened it to reveal what looked like operational reports. "I want to show you something. This is 6 months of delivery performance data from our Dallas region. Look at it and tell me what you see." Walter took the tablet and began reviewing the spreadsheets. Numbers, routes, timestamps, efficiency ratings. He scrolled slowly, letting patterns emerge rather than forcing conclusions. After 5 minutes, he said, "Your Tuesday and Wednesday deliveries are consistently late. Thursdays are actually your best performance day, which is unusual. And your overnight sortation team is clocking significantly more hours than they should need for the volume you're moving. Keep going. Someone in your logistics department is padding the delivery windows to compensate for the delays. Look here." Walter turned the tablet, pointing to specific cells. "Your projected delivery times increased by 15 minutes per route starting in March. That's not customer-driven. That's internal adjustment to hide the problem rather than fix it." Dale's expression was unreadable. Who do you think authorized that change? Whoever manages the routing system. Probably someone senior enough to make policy adjustments without extensive approval. That would be the senior logistics manager. Walter said nothing, but understanding passed between them. Lena had been covering up the inefficiencies, masking them with procedural changes that made the metrics look acceptable while the actual problem festered. "I've known something was wrong for months," Dale said. "But every time I ask questions, I get explanations that sound reasonable. Extensions are due to traffic patterns. Overtime is seasonal. Technology integration needs time to optimize. Everyone has an answer that justifies the status quo. That's how institutional problems persist," Walter replied. "People learn to explain failure rather than fix it." Dale took another sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving Walter's face. "Friday night, you diagnosed a significant operational issue in 5 minutes of conversation. Just now, you identified specific cover-up tactics in 5 minutes of reviewing data. That tells me you either have exceptional pattern recognition or you already knew about these problems." Walter met his gaze steadily. "I've heard about Redline's operations for 3 years. My wife works there." Senior Logistics Manager Lena Rourke. "Yes, I'm aware." "Then you know I've had access to secondhand information about your company's challenges for a while now. And you never thought to mention it? To offer suggestions? Maybe pursue consulting work with us?" "I wasn't invited to," Walter said simply. "And my wife made it clear that my input on her workplace was unwelcome." Dale leaned back in the booth, studying Walter with the kind of intensity that had probably built a successful company from scratch. "Let me ask you something. If I offered you a position, a real, permanent position at Redline, would you take it?" "Depends on the position. Director of Operations. Full authority over logistics, warehousing, distribution, the whole chain. Salary of $200,000 plus benefits and performance bonuses. Complete operational control with only me as your superior." The offer hung in the air between them. Walter took a sip of his coffee, which had gone lukewarm. "That's nearly double what your senior logistics manager makes," Walter said. "I know. It would create significant internal conflict. People who've been with the company for years would resent an outsider coming in above them." "I know that too. Including my wife." Dale nodded. "Especially your wife. But here's what I also know. I've spent 6 months and probably $200,000 on consultants who've given me reports full of recommendations I can't actually implement. You've given me more actionable intelligence in 2 conversations than I've gotten from anyone else. So yes, there would be conflict, but there would also be results." Walter set down his coffee mug. "I'd need complete authority. No interference from existing managers, no committee approvals for operational changes. Done. And I need access to everything. All data, all reports, all performance reviews going back at least 2 years. That's not a problem. Including personnel files." Dale's expression didn't change. "Including those. When would you want me to start?" 2 weeks. That gives HR time to process everything and gives you time to wrap up your current projects." Walter extended his hand. "I accept." They shook on it, a firm grip that sealed more than just an employment agreement. This was a transfer of power, a bet on Walter's ability to see what others had missed, to fix what others had ignored. "One question," Dale said as they stood to leave. "Why now? You could have approached me months ago with this same information. Why wait until Friday night?" Walter picked up the check, a small thing, but it felt appropriate. "Because timing matters. You needed to be frustrated enough to take a risk. and I needed you to see the problem yourself before I offered the solution. Dale laughed, the sound genuine and surprised. You're a patient man, Walter Rourke. I've learned to be. They walked out together into the midday heat. In the parking lot, Dale paused beside his Mercedes. Your wife, he said carefully. She's going to take this hard. I know. You prepared for that. Walter looked out across the empty lot, where heat rippled off the asphalt like water. I've been preparing for it for years. The announcement came during Redline's monthly staff meeting. Dale Whitaker stood at the front of the conference room, a space that held 40 employees from across the Dallas region. Lena sat in the second row, her notepad open, her expression attentive and professional. Walter wasn't present. He'd been asked to wait until the formal introduction was complete. Before we get into operational updates, Dale began, I want to share some organizational news. After careful consideration, I've created a new executive position, Director of Operations. This role will oversee all aspects of our logistics chain, from warehouse management to final delivery. The person filling this position will report directly to me and will have complete authority to implement necessary changes across all departments. Murmurs rippled through the room. Several managers exchanged glances. Creating an executive position wasn't unusual, but the timing suggested urgency. Effective 2 weeks from today, Walter Rourke will join Redline as our new Director of Operations. The murmurs stopped. Silence crashed down like a physical thing. Lena's pen stopped moving across the page. Her face had gone pale, then flushed deep red. Some of you may have met Walter at last week's leadership dinner, Dale continued, apparently oblivious to the tension. He brings 20-plus years of operations expertise and has already identified several opportunities for immediate improvement in our processes. I'm confident he's going to help us address the efficiency challenges we've been facing. A hand went up from the logistics team. What will his relationship be with existing department heads? Walter will have authority over all operational functions. Department heads will continue managing day-to-day activities, but strategic decisions and process changes will go through him. Another hand, in the senior logistics manager position, Dale's expression remained neutral. That position remains unchanged. However, logistics will now report to the Director of Operations rather than directly to me. Lena stood abruptly. Can I speak with you privately? After the meeting, we still have agenda items to cover. She sat back down, rigid, her hands pressed flat against the table. Walter would have recognized the gesture. It was how she looked when she was fighting to maintain control, when fury threatened to break through her professional facade. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but no one was paying attention. The energy in the room had shifted, become charged with speculation and concern. People were already calculating how this change would affect them, whose authority had just been diminished, whose decisions would now require additional approval. When Dale finally dismissed them, Lena was the first one out the door, heading directly to Dale's office. She didn't knock, just walked in and closed the door behind her. You're hiring Walter? The words came out sharp, accusatory. My husband. Dale settled behind his desk, his calm unshakable. I'm hiring the best person for the position. The fact that he's married to you is incidental. Like hell it is. You know what this looks like? It looks like favoritism. It looks like I leveraged a personal connection to get my husband a position. Did you recommend him? No. Then how is it favoritism? Walter earned this opportunity through his own merit. I sought him out, not the other way around. Lena paced the office, her professional composure cracking. He's a freelancer, Dale. He's never held a permanent executive position. He has no experience managing teams or navigating corporate structure. He has 23 years of experience solving exactly the kind of problems we're facing. That's worth more than a traditional resume. I've been with this company for 8 years. I've built the logistics department into what it is today. And now you're putting someone above me, someone who knows nothing about our specific operation. Dale's expression hardened. Lena, let me be direct. Your department has been underperforming for 6 months. Delivery times are up, costs are up, and customer complaints are up. When I ask you about these issues, you give me explanations instead of solutions. Walter gave me solutions. Those problems are industry-wide. every logistics company is dealing with. No, Dale, cut her off. I've talked to our competitors. I've looked at industry benchmarks. Our problems are not industry-wide. They're company-specific, and they exist in areas you manage. Lena stopped pacing. What are you saying? I'm saying that you've been managing symptoms instead of addressing root causes. You've been extending delivery windows to make the metrics look better rather than fixing the actual inefficiencies. You've been defending the status quo when you should have been demanding change. That's not fair. I work 70 hours a week for this company. I know you do, and I appreciate your dedication. But hours worked don't equal results delivered. Walter identified our crosstalk sequencing problem in 10 minutes of conversation. How long have you known about it? The question landed like a blade. Lena's mouth opened, closed. You did know about it, Dale said quietly. You've known for months, maybe longer. But you didn't fix it because fixing it would require admitting there was a problem in your department. Instead, you adjusted procedures to make the problem less visible. I was trying to maintain stability while we worked toward a solution. You were hiding the problem. There's a difference. Lena's hands were shaking now. She pressed them against her sides, trying to hide it. So that's it. You're just going to bring in someone new and undermine everything I've built. I'm bringing in someone who can see what you can't or won't. Whether he's your husband is irrelevant to me. What matters is that he can do what needs to be done. She stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions, anger, humiliation, fear. Finally, she said, I want it on record that I oppose this decision. Noted, but the decision stands. Lena turned and walked out without another word, leaving the door open behind her. In the hallway, several employees quickly looked away, pretending they hadn't been trying to overhear. Lena ignored them, walking straight to her office, closing the door, and sitting down at her desk. Her hands were still shaking. She pulled out her phone and called Walter. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. On the 3rd try, he answered. You knew, she said without preamble. You knew he was going to do this. Yes. And you didn't tell me? No. What? Walter's voice was calm, maddeningly even. Because you wouldn't have listened. You would have fought it, tried to undermine the offer, made it about you instead of about what the company needs. What the company needs? Jesus, Walter, do you hear yourself? You sound like you've already drunk the corporate Kool-Aid, and you haven't even started yet. Lena, no, you don't get to do this. You don't get to waltz into my workplace and take over. You don't get to make me look incompetent in front of people I've worked with for years. I didn't make you look incompetent. Your results did that. The silence that followed was dangerous, electric. What did you say? Dale showed me the performance data. I know about the delivery window extensions. I know about the routing inefficiencies you've been covering up. I know you've been managing around problems instead of solving them. You son of a bitch. Her voice had dropped to a whisper, which somehow made it more frightening. You've been studying my job. You've been analyzing my department like one of your consulting projects. I've been listening for 3 years. Every time you complained about work, every time you mentioned a problem, I filed it away. You gave me all the information I needed, and then you used it against me. I used it to get a position where I can actually fix things. If you wanted to fix them yourself, you had years to do it. Lena ended the call without responding. She sat in her office for 20 minutes, staring at her computer screen without seeing it. Then she pulled up her performance reviews, her project reports, every metric she'd been tracking. She looked at them with new eyes, trying to see what Dale had seen, what Walter had seen. The truth was there, undeniable once you stopped making excuses for it. Costs were up. Times were up. Efficiency was down. She'd known it, had felt the steady erosion of her department's performance, but she'd convinced herself it was temporary, fixable with minor adjustments. She'd been wrong. And now Walter, her husband, the man she'd told repeatedly wasn't building anything real, was being brought in to clean up her mistakes. The humiliation was total. Walter started at Redline on a Monday morning in early November. The temperature had finally dropped below 80, a cool front bringing the first real taste of autumn to North Texas. He arrived at 7:30, an hour before most employees, and was met by Dale at the entrance. Ready? Dale asked. Yes. They walked through the building together, Dale providing a quick tour of the facility. It was larger than Walter had expected. 50,000 square feet of warehouse space, advanced sorting equipment, a fleet of delivery trucks in the rear lot. Everything was clean, organized, expensive, and inefficient. Walter could see it immediately. The flow of goods through the warehouse was logical on paper, but impractical in execution. Freight arrived on the east dock, got sorted through the central area, then moved to the west dock for loading. But the sorting equipment was positioned wrong, creating bottlenecks during high-volume periods. And the loading sequence was alphabetical by route name rather than optimized by actual delivery schedules. Simple problems. Expensive consequences. Dale introduced him to department heads throughout the morning. Most were professional, shaking his hand and offering carefully neutral welcomes. A few were openly skeptical, their body language closed, their questions pointed. Lena was in her office when Dale and Walter reached the logistics department. She looked up from her computer, her expression perfectly composed. "Walter," she said, "welcome to Redline." "Thank you. I'm sure Dale has explained our operational structure. I'm happy to provide any background you need on existing processes." Her tone was formal, distant. They could have been strangers. "I appreciate that," Walter replied, matching her formality. "I'll probably schedule time with each department head over the next 2 weeks to understand current workflows." "Of course. Just let me know when." Dale watched the exchange with interest, but said nothing. After a moment, they moved on to the next department. That afternoon, Walter was given an office on the executive floor, a corner space with windows overlooking the warehouse. It was nearly twice the size of Lena's office, which hadn't gone unnoticed by the rest of the staff. He spent his first week in meetings, asking questions, reviewing processes, and reading 3 years of performance data. He didn't make any immediate changes, didn't announce any dramatic new policies. He just observed, listened, and took notes. But he was also doing something else, something Lena wouldn't discover until it was too late. He was reviewing personnel files. Dale had given him complete access, as promised. Walter read through every employee's history, every performance review, every incident report. He built a complete picture of who was excelling, who was coasting, and who was actively causing problems. Lena's file was thick. 8 years of employment, steady progression through the ranks, generally positive reviews. But there were notes buried in the middle sections that told a different story. Conflicts with subordinates, resistance to feedback, a tendency to prioritize perception over performance. And in the past 2 years, a steady decline in measurable results. Walter compiled everything into a detailed report, cross-referencing personnel issues with operational inefficiencies. He identified which problems were systemic and which were caused by specific individuals. He built cases backed by data for every recommendation he planned to make. On Friday of his second week, he presented it all to Dale. They sat in Dale's office for 3 hours, going through the report page by page. Walter explained how specific management decisions had created cascading failures throughout the operation. He showed where budget had been wasted, where procedures had been implemented to cover mistakes rather than prevent them, where entire teams had adapted to inefficiency because fixing it would require admitting fault. "Jesus," Dale muttered more than once. When they finished, Dale sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "How soon can you start implementing changes?" "Monday. But there's going to be resistance. People have been operating this way for years. They won't adapt easily." "That's fine. You have my full authority. Anyone who can adapt will need to find other opportunities." Walter nodded. "Including senior staff?" "Including anyone." They both knew who they were talking about. The changes started Monday morning with a company-wide email from Walter outlining new operational procedures. Routes would be reorganized based on delivery efficiency rather than alphabetical order. The cross-dock sequence would be redesigned to align with actual logistics needs. Overtime authorizations would require approval from the operations director, meaning Walter himself. By noon, his email inbox was flooded with questions, concerns, and complaints. By 5 o'clock, 3 people had scheduled meetings to argue against the changes. Lena came to his office at 6, after most staff had left for the day. "You're moving too fast," she said without preamble. Walter looked up from his computer. "I'm moving at the pace the company needs. You're upsetting people. You're making them feel like everything they've been doing is wrong. Some of what they've been doing is wrong. That's why I'm here." She closed the door, stepped closer to his desk. "You're going to create chaos. You can't just blow up existing processes and expect people to fall in line." "I'm not blowing anything up. I'm optimizing. There's a difference. To you, maybe. To them, it feels like you're saying they're incompetent." Walter saved his work and gave her his full attention. "Lena, I've been here 2 weeks. In that time, I've identified 17 major inefficiencies and probably 40 minor ones. Every single one of them has been documented in your department's processes for years. You had all the information I have. You just chose not to act on it. Because making changes requires political capital. It requires buy-in and relationship management, and I don't care about any of that." Walter's voice remained calm, but something hardened beneath it. "I care about results. Dale hired me to fix problems, not to manage feelings. That's going to backfire on you. Maybe, but the work will get done either way." Lena studied him, and for the first time, Walter saw something like recognition in her eyes. She was finally seeing him clearly, not as the quiet man who'd always been in the background, but as someone who'd been observing, planning, waiting. "You wanted this," she said quietly. "You wanted my job." "No. I wanted a position where I could actually use my skills instead of wasting them on temporary projects." "This isn't about you, Lena. It never was. How can you say that? You came into my company, took a position above me, and now you're systematically dismantling everything I built." "I'm not dismantling what you built. I'm fixing what you broke." The words hung between them, brutal in their simplicity. Lena's composure cracked. "I worked so hard. I gave everything to this company. And now you're making me look like a failure. You made yourself look like a failure by prioritizing status over substance. You cared more about having a title than about doing the work the title required. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You had years to fix these problems. Years to be the hero who turned things around. Instead, you hid them and hoped no one would notice. I'm just the person who finally did notice." She turned away, staring out his office window at the warehouse below. In the fading light, the space looked bigger, emptier. "I can't keep working here," she said finally. Walter didn't respond immediately. He'd expected this, had known it was coming since the moment he accepted Dale's offer. "That's your decision," he said. "You're not going to ask me to stay?" "No." She turned back to face him. "Why not?" "Because we both know you can't stay." "Not really. You'd fight every change I make, undermine every decision, all while convincing yourself you were protecting the company. It would be toxic for everyone, including you, including me." Lena wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture that made her look smaller, more vulnerable. "I thought we were a team." "We were never a team, Lena. We were two people who got married and then spent years discovering we wanted completely different things. I wanted success. You wanted the appearance of success. There's a difference." She laughed bitterly. "God, you've been holding this in for years, haven't you? Just waiting for the chance to tell me how much better you are than me." "I don't think I'm better than you. I think I'm better at this specific thing than you are. You're probably better at 100 other things. But operations management isn't one of them." The honesty seemed to hurt worse than cruelty would have. Lena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I'm going to resign," she said. "All right. Is that all you have to say?" Walter considered. "I think you'll land on your feet. You're smart, you're experienced, and you're good at projecting confidence. Another company will value those things. Just not this one. Not right now. Not while I'm here." She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already known. Then she walked out, leaving the door open behind her. Walter sat alone in his office for a long time after she left, watching darkness settle over the warehouse. He didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that this was how it had to be, that some changes required complete breaks rather than gradual transitions. Lena submitted her resignation the next morning, effective in 2 weeks. By that afternoon, everyone in the company knew. The gossip spread like wildfire. The husband had come in and pushed the wife out, corporate drama at its finest. But Walter didn't engage with the gossip. He just continued his work, implementing changes, fixing systems, proving through results rather than rhetoric that the changes were necessary. Within 3 weeks of Lena's departure, delivery times had improved by 12%. Within 6 weeks, overtime costs had dropped by 22%. Within 2 months, customer satisfaction scores reached their highest point in 3 years. The numbers spoke for themselves. Walter moved out of the house in January, 3 months after starting at Redline. The divorce proceedings had been remarkably clean. No children, no shared businesses, clear separation of assets. Lena kept the house. Walter took his truck and half the savings. He found an apartment near Grapevine Lake, a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a quiet complex. The space was smaller than the house, but it felt larger somehow, uncluttered by the accumulated weight of a failed marriage. Large windows looked out over the lake, and on clear mornings, Walter would stand with his coffee and watch the water reflect the sunrise. Sometimes he saw herons fishing in the shallows, their movements patient and precise. The apartment came furnished with basics, but Walter added his own touches gradually. A comfortable chair by the window, a good coffee maker, bookshelves he assembled himself and filled with the operations manuals and systems theory texts he collected over the years. It wasn't much, but it was entirely his own. At Redline, the transformation continued. Walter had restructured the entire logistics chain, implementing changes that rippled through every department. Some employees adapted enthusiastically, energized by the chance to work more efficiently. Others resisted, clinging to old methods until the results became undeniable. A few quit. Walter didn't try to stop them. By March, the company's operational metrics had improved across every measure. Dale began receiving calls from industry peers, asking what Redline had done to achieve such dramatic turnaround. He always gave the same answer. We hired someone who could see the problems we couldn't. Walter's salary came with the promised performance bonuses. His first check, arriving in February, included an additional $35,000. The note from Dale was brief. Results matter. Keep going. Walter deposited the check without ceremony and continued his work. He dated occasionally, a few dinners, a couple of attempts at connection, but nothing stuck. The truth was, he'd grown comfortable with solitude. After years of living with someone who demanded constant validation and attention, the quiet of his own space felt like luxury. One Saturday, in early April, Walter was at the grocery store near his apartment, shopping for his weekly essentials. He developed a routine. Early morning, before the crowds, efficient navigation through familiar aisles. He was examining tomatoes in the produce section when he saw her. Lena stood near the berries, wearing jeans and a sweater that looked too big on her. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She lost weight, he noticed, not in a healthy way, in the way people did when stress made eating feel like a chore. Their eyes met across the produce display. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lena picked up her basket and walked over, not hurrying, but not hesitating either. "Hello, Walter." "Lena." She glanced at his cart. Simple items, efficiently selected. "You look good." "Thank you. You do too." It was a polite lie, and they both knew it. "I heard Redline's performance has been exceptional," she said. "Congratulations. It's been a team effort. Don't be modest. Everyone knows it's your work." She shifted her weight, uncomfortable. "I've been doing contract work. Consulting, actually. It's been educational. I'm glad you're working. Are you?" "I wasn't sure if you'd care either way." Walter set down the tomato he'd been holding. "I never wanted you to fail, Lena. I just wanted you to recognize that I wasn't failing." She nodded slowly. "I know that now. I didn't then, but I do now." Silence stretched between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the grocery store, shopping carts, refrigeration units, the distant beep of checkout scanners. "I was terrible to you," Lena said finally. "I spent years treating you like you weren't good enough, like your work didn't matter. And I did it because it made me feel better about myself. That's not an excuse, just an explanation. I know why you did it." "Did you always know?" "Eventually." She smiled sadly. "You were patient with me for so long." I should have appreciated that. Instead, I took it as weakness. It wasn't weakness. No, I see that now. It was confidence. You knew what you were capable of. You didn't need to prove it to anyone until the right moment came along. Walter picked up another tomato, examined it. I wasn't trying to hurt you. The job at Redline, the changes I made, none of it was about revenge. I believe you, but it still hurt. Not because you were cruel, but because you were right. About everything. About me, about my work, about the difference between looking successful and actually being successful. What happened wasn't your fault entirely, Walter said carefully. I enabled some of it by staying quiet. I could have challenged you more, pushed you to see things differently. Instead, I just waited. Why did you wait? Because I knew you weren't ready to hear it. People don't change because someone tells them they should. They change when the consequences of not changing become unbearable. Lena looked down at her basket. A few items, hastily selected. Do you hate me? The question hung between them, vulnerable and raw. No, Walter said honestly. I never hated you. I was disappointed, sometimes angry, eventually just tired. But hate? No. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd been different people? If I'd been less competitive and you'd been more, I don't know, assertive? Sometimes. But I don't think it would have changed anything fundamental. We wanted different things out of life. That's not something you can compromise on. What did you want? Peace. Respect. The freedom to be good at what I'm good at without having to constantly prove it. And what did I want? Walter considered. To be seen. To be important. To know that you mattered. That sounds shallow. It's not. Everyone wants to matter. You just chose the wrong way to measure it. Lena's eyes were wet now, but she didn't cry. Just stood there, holding her basket, looking at the man she'd been married to for 12 years and hadn't really known at all. I lost my job, my marriage, my confidence, all in the span of 6 months, she said. That's hard karma. It's just karma, Walter corrected gently. Not hard or soft, just the natural consequence of choices. I made bad choices. Some of them. And now you're making different ones. That's how life works. She nodded, accepting this. Are you happy? I'm content. Happy feels like a bigger word than I need. Content, she repeated. That actually sounds nice. It is. Another silence, but this one felt different. Less hostile, more resigned. The kind of silence that came when two people finally stopped fighting and accepted reality. I should go, Lena said. I have a client call this afternoon. Good luck with it. Thank you. She started to walk away, then turned back. Walter? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for leaving you, but for how I treated you while we were together. You deserved better than that. So did you, Walter said. You deserved a partner who challenged you instead of just accommodating you. Maybe, she smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine. Maybe in the next life we'll both find the right people. Maybe. She left then, disappearing into another aisle. Walter finished his shopping, checked out, and drove home to his apartment by the lake. That evening, he stood on his balcony with a glass of water, watching the sun set over Grapevine Lake. The water reflected orange and pink and purple, colors bleeding into each other in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow did. He thought about Lena, about the years they'd spent together, about how two people could share space without ever really sharing understanding. He thought about patterns and systems, about how human relationships followed their own kind of logic if you paid attention. And he thought about the future, his work at Redline, the challenges still ahead, the satisfaction of solving problems that mattered. For the first time in years, maybe decades, Walter felt completely aligned with his own life. No compromises, no accommodations, no pretending to be something he wasn't. Just clarity, just peace. Below, the lake reflected the darkening sky, patient and vast. Walter watched until full night had fallen, then went inside to prepare for Monday. 6 months later, Dale Whitaker called Walter into his office on a Friday afternoon. Close the door, Dale said, which was unusual. Most of their conversations were open, collaborative. Walter sat down, curious. Dale pushed a folder across the desk. Open it. Inside were financial reports, performance metrics, industry comparisons. Walter scanned them quickly, his trained eye picking out the relevant data. Redline had exceeded every quarterly target. Efficiency was up 30% year over year. Costs were down 18%. Customer retention had reached 97%, the highest in the company's history. These are excellent, Walter said. They're better than excellent. They're transformative. Dale leaned back in his chair. I've been running this company for 28 years. I've hired expensive consultants, implemented cutting-edge technology, invested in training programs. Nothing ever moved the needle like this. The foundation was already there. I just optimized what existed. Don't be modest. You rebuilt the entire operation from the ground up while making it look like simple tweaks. That takes more than technical skill. It takes strategic vision. Walter waited. Dale didn't call him in just to deliver praise. I'm 57 years old, Dale continued. I've been thinking about succession planning for the past few years. My kids aren't interested in the business, and I don't want to sell to a competitor who'll just strip us for parts. That's wise. I want you to buy the company. Walter blinked, the first time Dale had truly surprised him in months. What? Not today, but over the next 5 years, I want to transition ownership to you. We'll structure it so you can afford it. Seller financing, equity stakes, whatever makes sense. By the time I'm 62, I want to retire knowing Redline is in hands that understand what makes it work. Walter processed this carefully. That's a significant responsibility. It is, but you've already proven you can handle it. More importantly, you care about doing things right, not just making them look right. That's rare. I need time to consider this. Take all the time you need. But Walter, Dale's expression turned serious. You spent years being underestimated. Years watching people take credit for their positions while you did the actual work in the background. That's over now. You've proven what you're capable of. Don't go back to hiding it. I'm not hiding. Good. Because the world needs people who can actually fix things, not just people who can talk about fixing things. You're one of the former. Don't waste that. They talked for another hour about details, possibilities, timelines. Walter asked practical questions, avoiding emotional ones. But underneath his calm exterior, something fundamental was shifting. For most of his adult life, Walter had operated on the periphery, helpful but not central, competent but not celebrated. He told himself he preferred it that way, that he didn't need recognition or authority. But that had been a lie. Not malicious, just self-protective. The truth was he'd been waiting, preparing, building skills and knowledge and patience until the moment came when someone finally asked him to step forward. Dale Whitaker had asked, and Walter, who'd spent years in the background, was finally ready to lead. On a Sunday morning in late September, exactly 1 year after the dinner where everything had changed, Walter stood on his balcony with his coffee. The air had turned cooler overnight, the first real hint of fall breaking through the lingering heat of summer. The lake was calm, reflecting clouds that moved slowly across the sky. A family of ducks paddled near the shore, their movements synchronized in that unconscious way that came from following instinct rather than thought. Walter's phone buzzed. A text from Dale. Board meeting Tuesday. Be ready to present the Q3 results. They're going to love you. He smiled faintly and pocketed the phone. Below, someone was moving into the apartment complex, a young couple hauling boxes up the stairs, laughing about something while they worked. Walter remembered that feeling, the optimism of starting fresh, the belief that this time, this place, this person would be different. Maybe it would be. Maybe they'd be luckier than he and Lena had been. Or maybe they'd learn the same lessons he had. That success wasn't about appearance or status or proving yourself to people who didn't want to understand you. Success was about finding the right place for your particular skills, about being patient enough to wait for opportunity and brave enough to seize it when it arrived. Walter had been patient. He'd waited through years of dismissal and condescension, through a marriage that had slowly hollowed him out, through countless moments when he could have spoken up but chose silence instead. And when the moment finally came, he'd been ready. Not with anger or vengeance or any desire to hurt, just with clear-eyed assessment of what needed to be done and the skill to do it. Lena had taught him something valuable, though she'd never intended to. She'd taught him that some people would never see his worth, no matter how clearly he demonstrated it, and that trying to make them see it was a waste of time better spent finding people who already did. Dale had been one of those people. The employees at Redline who'd embraced the changes were others. Even the quiet satisfaction of his apartment by the lake, the simple pleasure of coffee and sunrise and silence. These were forms of recognition that mattered more than any title or salary ever could. Walter finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and prepared for his morning walk. 5 miles along the lake trail, the same route he took every Sunday. Regular, predictable, peaceful. But as he laced up his running shoes, he thought about Dale's offer. Ownership, not just management or oversight, but actual ownership of something he'd helped rebuild. The responsibility was enormous. The opportunity was greater. He'd say yes. He already knew that. Not because he needed to prove anything anymore, but because the work mattered and he was the right person to do it. Some people lost everything not because they were unlucky, but because they refused to see the value standing right beside them. Walter had been that value. Patient, observant, unshakable, and he'd never stand in the background again.